my name is Dorian, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through the different books, TV shows, and movies that I have read and watched over the month of July for 2021. I will be describing and discussing them briefly before I rate them on a 5-star scale. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first book that I read for the month of July is Wendy Darling by A.C. Wise. This book is a retelling of the second Peter Pan film for those of you who have seen it. For those of you who have not seen it, basically this book follows Wendy's daughter Jane, who is kidnapped from her home in London and taken to Neverland, where she is supposed to become the next Wendy to the Lost Boys there and to Peter. Although we don't see Hook, that doesn't mean that there isn't a foe that must be faced. And as well as following Jane, we see Wendy make a comeback as the strong mother who goes after her daughter and rescues her from Neverland and the perils that now lay there. I really enjoyed this retelling. I loved the characters and the feminist aspect to it. I loved how it followed Jane's story as well as Wendy's, but when we went into Wendy's point of view, we got one of three, which was her point of view from when she was in Neverland with her brothers, her point of view when she is rescuing her daughter, and her point of view after she had returned from Neverland with her brothers, and how she coped with returning to the real world. Despite this being a retelling of the second Peter Pan film, I still saw different adaptations that I've already read and watched being incorporated into this one, but it also had its own aspects that made it its own story. I'm a pretty big fan of the story of Peter Pan, so this was right up my alley, and this retelling was definitely enjoyable for me. I will say that I found that some of the points that were made in this book were repeated throughout it, and it just became kind of redundant because the wording wasn't very different, and they were brought up in a fashion where you would think to yourself while reading it, well, didn't we just talk about this, or didn't she just say this in another way? Didn't we already know this? But aside from that, I enjoyed the writing style. I will say that I think the author probably assumed that readers had already heard the story of Peter Pan and already had a version of the characters in their mind. So the character descriptions seemed to be lacking in that regard. So if you've never seen Peter Pan or heard about it or read it, you wouldn't really have a good idea of what the characters are supposed to look like. But luckily for me, I've seen the original movies as well as other adaptations, so I already had versions of these characters in my mind. Other than that, I had all good things to say about this book, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The first show that I watched for the month of July was Loki, which is the Marvel spin-off series about the god of mischief, Loki, from the Thor movies. It is on Disney Plus if you would like to stream it. I really did enjoy this show up until the last episode. I liked this show much more than Falcon and Winter Soldier, which to me fell really flat and wasn't nearly as good as WandaVision was. But the last episode of this series was just so anticlimactic and just bizarre to me that it felt really flat and just left me with an extremely disappointed feeling. I did enjoy the characters, the cinematography, and the script though, so even though I didn't really like the story as much and I thought it was a little bit lacking like Falcon and Winter Soldier, I still thought that the show was strong in other areas such as those. I was going to give this show a really high rating, but because of the last episode, that in particular just bumped my rating down by so much. However, I will say that the very last scene of the last episode of the show really hooked me again. So if there was going to be another season, which I'm pretty sure there will be, I probably will continue watching, but I just hope, again, like with Falcon and Winter Soldier, that the creators just step it up a little bit. So I gave Loki 3.5 out of 5 stars. The first movie that I watched for the month of July is Miss Sloane, which is on Netflix. This film is about activists for gun control fighting the media, and ultimately it's a film in which the main character discovers and reveals corruption in our government that is centered around the idea of gun control and pushing it forward. I thought it was very well done. I really enjoyed the characters and the cinematography. The main character was such a boss. I loved her so much. However, she did have her faults and I did get irritated with her, but overall she was just such a strong independent female and I loved it. Some of the dialogue did get lost for me and some of the shots didn't seem to flow as well together and could become confusing, but other than that, I did enjoy the cinematography and the story itself. I also thought that the cast was great. So out of 5 stars, I gave Miss Sloane 4.5. The next book that I read is The Invincible Summer of Juniper Jones by David McQueen. This book follows a black boy named Ethan who gets into trouble in Washington State, which is where he lives, and so his father sends him to this small town in Alabama for the summer as punishment for what happened at home. But when Ethan arrives, he finds that he is the only black kid in this town, and so right away he feels singled out until a girl named Juniper Jones comes into play and she befriends Ethan, and they make this bucket list of things that they want to do throughout the summer, and so Juniper Jones names it their Invincible Summer, and it's about their adventures together as well as some racially driven events that take place. I loved this book. I think it might be one of my new favorite books of all time. I loved Juniper and Ethan's characters. I really enjoyed the story and how it tackles the topic of race and the issue of racism. I found that this book was very unique in and of itself, and the story was very unique in and of itself. I really enjoyed McQueen's writing style, and I would definitely read more of their books. This book definitely gave me insight into what a lot of black people have gone through both in the past and unfortunately still continue to go through in the present, and it definitely gave me some ideas on how I can understand those situations better. The one issue that I had with this book is that it's based in 1955, but I found that the writing and the dialogue was very present day. So it could have been based in present day, but I really did enjoy the thought of it being in the 50s and during that like kind of retro period. And aside from that, I loved it and I recommend it to anyone, honestly. I think that everyone should read this book. So surprise, surprise, I gave The Invincible Summer of Juniper Jones 5 out of 5 stars. The next movie that I watched in July was Luca, which is also streaming on Disney+. Luca is a very family-friendly Pixar film which follows a young Italian boy who lives under the sea and is a sea creature. However, when he goes out of the water and goes onto dry land, he turns human. So it's about him going on land and experiencing human things for the first time. He befriends another sea creature who is living as a human, and they both end up befriending a human girl when they venture into the seaside city just above the water. The three form an inseparable bond, and when it comes between choosing between human life and sea life, the line between the two becomes blurred, and you will have to watch the film to find out what happens in the end. This was such a lovely story, and I loved the characters, especially Luca's. He's extremely innocent and naive from living under the water for so long, but he quickly adapts to the human world and doesn't hesitate to befriend people and experience new things. The animation was so good for this film, and it was crazy because Luca has these daydreams and these nightmares, and they're so creative, and it just feels like you are there, you are with him, and you're experiencing what he's experiencing and thinking what he's thinking. Being able to see inside of Luca's head also allows the audience to sympathize with him and his choices. Despite that, I still think that he's a great protagonist. I also loved how this film was based in Italy. I myself am Italian and I've always wanted to visit, so being able to experience a bit of that country and that culture through this film was really heartwarming to me. I loved how everything was written in Italian that you saw, posters, books, menus, and the characters even spoke a good deal of Italian, which I thought was an extremely unique aspect as well. Overall, this film was very well done and I highly recommend it. So I gave Luca 5 out of 5 stars. The third and final book I read in July is The Last Wish, and I'm so sorry, but I am not even going to try and pronounce the author's name because I will butcher it, but he is Polish and he wrote the entirety of the Witcher series, which is what the games and the Netflix show are based on. This book is what the first season of the Netflix series roughly follows. It's basically a compilation of short stories about the main character Geralt, who is a witcher. He has special abilities that aid him in fighting monsters, and that's how he makes his living. Like the book The Children of Húrin by J.R.R. Tolkien, which I talked about in my last Media Munchies video, this one, as I said, explaining it, is basically a compilation of short stories about the main character rather than an actual novel. But like with The Children of Húrin, I actually really enjoyed that, and I think I actually might really enjoy short stories, so I think I might pick up a couple of compilations of short stories and see how I like them. But I really enjoyed this book, the characters, the different stories, the dialogue. I loved how there were strong female characters in it, which was a little surprising to me, but I remember watching an interview when the Netflix series The Witcher first came out, and someone had talked about how the author's interpretation of of strong women came from the strong women in his life, especially his mother. So I thought that was great, and I really enjoyed that aspect. Like with Wendy Darling, this book, if you hadn't seen the Netflix series or if you hadn't played the games or seen the games being played, it would be really hard to picture the characters that are described, because I know for a fact that if I hadn't seen the TV series, I would have no idea what anyone is supposed to look like in this book. But that didn't affect my reading of it too much. And the only thing that really did affect my reading is that at some points in time, the writing could be a little bit awkward while I was reading this book. But personally, I think that's just because this is an English adaptation of the Polish version, the original version of The Witcher. So I'm not really going to put that on the author himself. But I would honestly love to pick up an original Polish copy of The Witcher one day. So maybe someday I will go to Poland and I will go into a bookstore just to get an original copy of The Witcher. So out of 5 stars, I gave The Witcher 4. Alright everyone, those are all the books, TV shows, and movies that I consumed for the month of July. If you have seen any of these movies or TV shows or read any of these books, please let me know down below, and also let me know about what your thoughts and feelings were on them, and if they differed from mine. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel to help it grow, and aside from that, I will see you all next time.